It is Thursday, January 10th, 2019. And welcome to the MMA Beat, everyone. My name is Luke Thomas. I am the host of this program. Appreciate you guys tuning in. I am from, of course, MMA Fighting and SiriusXM. And look at this. We are back, our first panel of the brand new year. Nice and shiny. Everyone showered. Everyone looks good. Yeah. Let's get it started. To my left, that is Danny Segura from MMAFighting.com. She makes her triumphant return. Phoenix Carnivale, the highly requested Phoenix Carnivale, is back from the In Fighting Shape podcast, as well as Access TV and UFC Unfiltered. Everywhere, really, everywhere. And at the end, the Jamoke of the century. There he is, Iceman, Chuck Mindenhall.
Didn't take long into 2019 to get called something, but that's good.
The man in the hat from The Ringer, as well as MMAFighting.com. So thank you guys so much for joining us. We were supposed to be on last week, but I'm frail and dying, and I literally injured my back, and I could not move, but I feel better. I'm ready to go. So here we are. Let's not waste another moment dealing with my ailments. All right, boys and girls, let's see. Lots of different stories I wanted to get to. We'll recycle a couple of topics that we were going to get to from last week, but let's start with the most pressing news of the week. Danny, I will go to you first on this one. My young friend, the welterweight title picture, bit of a mess. Everyone knows at this point what the news is. Kamaru Usman is going to get the next shot at Tyron Woodley for the UFC welterweight strap. That should be actually a really good fight, I hope. But Colby Covington got passed over. The biggest takeaway from that is what? There's a lot of elements to it, and I'll piece them all together. Mm-hmm. But as a general overview, when you think about the situation, what occurs most to you?
Well, we know I feel like we always talk about this, but the belt's being devalued. At this point, holding an interim title is basically nothing. At one point, it meant just, your golden ticket to get, a shot at the champ, because you knew there had to be some sort of unification at some point. But at this point, there's none of that taking place. So it's just a prop to, fill out a main event at this point. You can be an interim champion, but you can get easily skipped over if you're not, on the good side with the UFC. So that was my biggest takeaway. At this point, like fighting for an interim belt, sure, it might get you more money when you fight that night, but after that, it's basically worthless.
Yeah, I mean, for me, it's just it's one of those things that I'm not surprised, because the way that I know that we're going to talk a little bit about the UFC's kind of feckless handling of situations in a little bit, but if you just follow the trends of the last year, I really feel like it's really not that big of a surprise, honestly. The only surprising thing is, I think in most people's minds, we have Colby Covington as the bigger fight, and I think sometimes we cater to that. We think like, oh, well, of course they're going to make that fight ahead of this one. Now, I don't know the entire politics behind how they came to this. I know the stuff that we see, we know the stuff we're told, but how they actually came up with, okay, let's reward Usman and put him in this title fight. It could go any different direction. I know I was in Dallas when Usman was cutting weight, behind the scenes, and I talked to him as he was doing this, and he was a team player. He was ready to step in for Darren Till if that fight had fallen through. And I think that, honestly, I really believe that was a solid that the UFC is remembering, but that's probably a small piece of it. I don't know the whole set of it, but I think that it's just the collective idea that Colby was supposed to get, I think he was primed for that shot, and that's the part that's a little bit surprising for me.
I think a lot of the talk has to do with it's very unclear what titles happen and when you get stripped of something and why you get stripped of something. And Covington, who has a very loud voice and a very brash approach to how he feels about the situation, is the thing that we're hearing right now, but we don't really know the behind-the-scenes efforts, too. There was a weird situation with, and this is old, with Kamaru Usman saying that, well, I wanted to fight you and you wouldn't fight me. So I'm wondering, were there times where Covington was like, no, I'm only going to do this, 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 and that?
Yes,
and the UFC was like, hey, we're going to punish you. And Covington was saying, I never wanted to fight you. I never said I was going to fight you. I was never asked to fight you. And Kamaru was like, we were doing Unfiltered, and it was a weird coincidence, but it was a little messed up to Colby, and it wasn't UFC Unfiltered's fault. It was just a timing issue, like, you know what it is with fighter schedules. So we're interviewing Covington on the phone, but we have Kamaru Usman in studio, and Usman could have left. But he was like, no, I'll stay. And we were like, all right, well, that'll be fun. They'll talk a little bit, whatever. And I think Covington got upset and hung up. And it was like, oh, man, he probably feels attacked now by this situation. Then he gets this interim title. He is next in line. They've beat the same guys. They didn't face each other. But we know that there's a lot of fights, and there's a lot of places to go, and a lot of it is a timing issue. I don't blame him for taking off for a sinus issue. Have you guys ever had like a sinus? It's hard. It's impossible to fight. In fact, like if your sinuses are really, really bad, even when you hit something, not even get hit, you will feel the reverb into your sinus
really
cavity.
hates that though. Apparently, going back to the Amanda Nunes thing.
But they're not taking it seriously. But I'm telling
Yeah.
you, as somebody who's had like sinus issues and has competed, it's almost impossible. I would not want to fight Tyron Woodley when I couldn't breathe. So. I'm looking at the whole thing as a whole, and I don't know if this is somewhat of a scheduling issue. And also, dude, you got to be ready. You got to do what we say when we say it.
Yeah. I mean, Colby is ready. He's saying that he can show up and he can fight. So that's the whole issue. It's like, okay, it's not the situation where Darren Till got the shot at Tyron Woodley, where it was like Colby wasn't ready. This is a completely different situation. You got a man that's ready. You got a man that was a former interim title, and yet you're skipping him over. I think this also gives an insight on what the UFC's priorities are, in the sense of, look at Khabib, look at certain champions that are sort of playing hard with the UFC. Right now, they kind of don't want that. Let's say Usman goes in there and beats Tyron Woodley. Well, what he has shown to the UFC up to this point was like, hey, I'm here to fight, anytime, whenever you need it, I'll show up. While Colby, not champion yet, undisputed, he's kind of picking his spots. And then, the UFC's like, okay, well, what if he does become champion? Then we might have a problem in our hands, and they have a busy schedule, as you said, so.
The strangest thing is Colby's kind of, self-worth is up here. And I think that a lot of times fans and media basically adopt his attitude towards himself, which is an interesting phenomenon that happens in the fight game. We've seen this.
Chief of
right, exactly. But this move tells me that the UFC does not. Either that, or they treat him like Nick Diaz a little bit, like where they're like, we're not playing your game, you're playing our game. And I feel like there's a little bit of that going on through this whole process. And if you look really at it as, we talk about Colby Covington like he's a draw. We haven't seen that yet. We really don't know that yet.
Right, but I mean, let's be fair to Colby. Here's an interesting spot that he's in.
I'm just pointing out, like, it's basic black and white.
He overstates, I think, his own drawing power pretty considerably, and so people throw that back in his face. But let's be clear about this. Colby's in a position where he's healthy. He is, some people will dispute this, but he is basically the consensus #1 contender. And the UFC didn't give him a fight. When does that ever end? And promotionally, the biggest fight, at least for Tyron Woodley. And they didn't give him a fight. He has all 3 of those, and they didn't do it. To me, that is
They also had
crazy.
a perfect slam dunk, really, because you had Woodley come out in that Dallas card, and really I thought people didn't like him. They seemed to like him coming out of it more, and I felt like this was a real Woodley. I felt like he gained a lot of fan
the Till
interest.
Fight
I think that he somehow he was swayed in his favor, and if they could have capitalized on that with Colby Covington, you have a natural antagonist in that situation, and it would have been really interesting to see that dynamic play out in March. You know what I mean?
Yeah. I get why he's upset. If I got the interim belt and then I didn't get to go for the title, it would be like, why did I get to this step? And it seems that that's what's confusing to not only the fans, but to the fighters. What's the progression? This is the only sport where it's unclear. If you take baseball, for example, you go to the playoffs and then you have the next thing, and you go against this team and that team, and then it's the World Series. It's very, very clear. With this type of situation, it's not clear. And as sports fans, it's like, what does this happen? I don't get it.
It's on matchmaking subjectivity,
Sure, which it kind of has to be because we're human beings and injuries is not a whole team. So to be fair, I understand that too. But this is a weird situation with the story that we aren't getting.
Yeah. The thing that occurs to me, we see it all the time, it's like you got to be real careful with the UFC playing your hand. It's not that you can't do it, but just consider, what's the lesson here that I take? I think the biggest one is, I think you pointed out something, like they really value guys, or ladies, whatever, who accommodate their aggressive event schedule. If you say, boy, the best thing you can say to the UFC is, I can make weight, and then you do it, they love that. Boy, they will give you endless opportunities if you can do that. That's one. But the bigger one here is, Colby is ready. He is the biggest fight for Tyron Woodley, and he is the #1 contender. Again, that's a little bit disputed, but I think in fairness he is. And they passed him by. Why? Because they know it would be a bigger fight with Colby and Woodley. But there is a order that they want to preserve. We're up here and you're down there. Yeah. And they'll pay a tax to get there. Dude, they'll do that with the Diaz brothers. You think Colby Covington has a prayer to break that gridlock? To me, that's the biggest one, is maintaining order.
Especially after the McGregor, because let's face it, let him go too far. He set precedents,
Yeah. Great
point. And now they're trying to reel it back in.
Yeah, reel it back in. And I mean, from the business standpoint, when I look back and I think about working for the LFA, which is somewhat of a feeder league to the UFC, these guys are nervous. They're biting their nails. And I'm like, what's going on? They're like, well, after this fight, I got to get ready because, the UFC might call me because they're going to be in my town. And these guys are always thinking, and girls are thinking, I've got to kind of stay ready just in case. And a lot of them take short notice fights with the hope and the prayer, fingers crossed, that gets them and keeps them in. When a lot of times, people want to have that full 6 weeks or 12 weeks for a fight camp. And oh my God, I just want to be there so bad that I'll be ready and stay ready.
You mentioned this, let's circle back to Danny's point about interim titles. There's a famous piece of deposition, I think it was Lawrence Epstein who said this. It could have been Valenza Fertitta, so if I'm getting it wrong, please forgive me. But the basic idea was that UFC brass had said, they were asked about what is the significance of holding a title. And they were like, it doesn't really, if you look at the deposition, they basically say, it doesn't really mean anything. We just give it to the best fighter every night. Now, they'll talk differently. In public.
Wow.
This is true. That's what they say.
Wow.
When actually pressed under perjury, penalty of perjury, they admitted it doesn't mean anything other than we give it to the best fighter each night. Right, that's what it means. So that wasn't even interim belt. That was actual divisional titles. Now we treat it differently, and it does actually hold a little bit of difference in terms of pay. Yeah. Right, literally in the contract, it matters, and your position on a card and what kind of cards you get on. But the interim,
those are a lot of things, though.
Okay,
yeah.
in terms of monetary difference, it's quite legitimate. But everything else, I don't know what it is, and if they can just take it from you whenever they want, I mean, what does it really mean? The point being is this: the interim title is now a cheap facsimile of even that. What is the interim title anymore? I legitimately
number one contender spot to go for the title.
But it's
That's what
pretty
I thought.
clearly not.
Yeah. Like after this.
So if I had to ask you, what does it do before because I asked this question right when Colby got stripped, and we were kind of like, well, it still holds you in pole position. It doesn't even hold you in pole position. Yeah. I'm not really sure what it does other than make a poster with one more belt on it.
But because he got stripped, is that part of the thing? Like, if he still had it, would it have changed this decision?
I think if Woodley was healthy and they could have made that fight at 233, it wouldn't have mattered. But because Woodley wasn't ready at 233 and they had to go to 235, and I'm told that Colby was offered Kamaru Usman up to 5 times, including for an interim title there.
Wow.
And he was like, nope, I want the title. I am fighting for the title.
I mean, at that point, he'd be defending his
interim title. You could understand his position. Yeah. In any case, what is it? It is a ghost.
It's a ghost.
It's the same thing, but just watered down. Because having an interim title does give you some cards to play with, right? But that used to be the only thing. Like, you have an interim title, you're fighting for the belt next. Now, you have that, and that puts you a little bit above the other contenders. But you also have to, go the extra mile, do a little more, play with the UFC. And, be a draw, which Colby is, I guess, in this situation with Tyron.
I always thought it was more, it's obviously a placeholder, but it was more like almost roping in the actual champion into a fight. Like, you're saying, like, hey, now you got to face this guy who has this interim.
That's such a good point.
You know what I mean? Yeah. But these days, it really doesn't play out that way. So it's almost like a stopgap just to fit their schedule, so they have a symbol in play. That's all it is.
Yeah. And for the most part, I think at this point, the interim title is just to get those main events. It's just to get those posters, because that's really the main purpose. The only purpose why an interim title is created in the first place is because there isn't a championship fight on the card.
Right.
So that's really the main purpose. Yeah. After that, all bets are off.
I always think back to Carlos Condit and George St. Pierre and how awesome it was to see that collide and see George show that he was the actual champion. And that meant something. That definitely meant something at that time.
There can be circumstances where it's real. I thought when TJ Dillashaw was holding the belt in Dominic Cruz's absence, Henry and all that. I thought all that was quite legitimate.
It's probably one of the rare cases where the interim title made complete sense, and they took forever to actually do something about it.
It's like what birthed the idea, I think, the Dominic Cruz situation.
But now it's just promotional leverage, and I don't even know what you want to call it. It's a nice trophy to take home if you got it. Yeah. Beyond that, I'm not really sure. How do we feel about Usman versus Woodley? We haven't really talked much about it. You like it? Phoenix, what do you like about it?
I think that Tyron's speed and power, and then Usman's wrestling, I just like the idea of the two of them together. I think they're both very cerebral fighters, too. I actually think, I was listening to Dean Thomas the other day saying that he thinks that this is a much more dangerous fight for Tyron as well. that there's more tools in play with Usman. So I think it's a really exciting matchup.
Yeah, and it's funny because we were wrapping our heads around Covington, right? Like how that's going to be a nice fight. So it kind of was like, stop, wait, let's look at this one. Usman strikes me as that guy who's going to throw the monkey wrench into the whole system works, and then all of a sudden we're talking about him defending. Like, he has that vibe to me because it's not just he's undefeated, he's just been under the radar enough. He doesn't get a ton of publicity, and obviously we're sitting here talking about him like he's not the big fight, you know what I mean? Yeah. I think that I agree with you. I think he's a really cerebral fighter. You probably know better in terms of the breaking down his actual style, but I do feel like you see him adapting, and he knows kind of how to exploit guys' weaknesses and everything else. So, I look at this because that's how Woodley fights, and I think that's going to be a really fun chess match for me.
Yeah.
You almost never see, they calling me, you almost never see Usman in trouble.
Yeah.
When was the last time you saw him in trouble? It's like, he gets hit with a punch here or there, all right, but he doesn't really get in trouble. And if you watched Monday's MMA Hour, he has literally historic output for a welterweight. I mean, some of the highest levels of strikes and takedowns in UFC history. So I do think there's a possibility it could be boring at times because you got two physical specimens.
Yeah.
And two good wrestlers, and they're going to counteract each other there. But that dam's going to break.
And neither one of them is reckless, so they're not going to go collide.
Yeah.
And,
also they're both smart. So
yes.
you got to figure out how they're going to get past that. So that could be a little bit tricky, but I do like it. I want to circle back to Colby before we move on from this topic. I did see it was kind of funny. Look, if you don't like Colby, I'm not here to talk you into it. I find him to be the MAGA shtick was not as funny as the spoiling Star Wars. And then hashtagging.
I was pissed about that.
Do you understand?
Pissed about that. I'm not gonna lie.
Jose, I was pissed about it for 10 seconds. I was like, God damn it, Colby. And then I laughed because if you look closely, he tagged NFL Draft in it the same time, and he was just spraying the block with the AK. If your grandma gets it, your grandma gets it. I just loved everything about that. I thought that was so funny. Now, the MAGA stick is a little less funny, but the point being is this. He obviously pisses a lot of people off, and quite intentionally. I did see some media response I thought was kind of funny. They were like, oh, Colby had it coming. I'm like, you don't really get to talk about the power imbalance between fighters and UFC if you only apply it to sympathetic characters.
Right.
Either it matters or it doesn't. And you would all agree, Colby, maybe you disagree, but it's fairly obvious he got done wrong here, no?
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
All right.
I think Jay Bet had a really good column basically pointing
if-
out what you just said there.
If he didn't have the interim belt at a point, I would be like, well, blah, blah, blah. But because he did, that's why I can agree with that.
That's what makes all the difference, the interim title, or else he'd just be any contender, and at that point, any contender works,
right.
you know?
Yeah.
You got to set aside whatever you feel about Colby and just look at the mechanics of what's going on. Look at what the interim title's supposed to be and, what it's not doing. So
I can see it being tongue-in-cheek, though. That's why I don't get as mad when he says things as I do sometimes with others. I think, I know that he knows what he's doing because he looks back like this, waiting for, a little bit of a response.
If you imagine in your head that the real Colby Covington is like some far-out left-wing tree hugger, and that this version you see is the put-on, it gets so funny to watch.
Yeah.
I often think of it that way. Last thing on this is, you know what? We can skip it, actually. It's not that big a deal. All right. Let's move on to something else. UFC is going to be now on ESPN. In fact, it was kind of funny. I was watching, two different things I was watching. One, the national championship for Clemson and Alabama. And Chris Fowler had a little bit of trouble getting through the Henry Cejudo name, which was kind of funny. I also was watching...
What did he say?
Huh?
What did he say?
He goes, don't miss it. It's January 19th when TJ Dillashaw takes on Henry Cejudo. There was this real dramatic pause, but he got it. And some producer was like, it's Cejudo. In the end, though, he got it right. And then I was watching, I'm sort of addicted to watching Zion Williamson at Duke, this physical specimen. And then
30 points against Wake.
I mean, what are you, 6'9", 315 with a 40-inch vertical? I've never heard of something like that. Anyway, so they were playing.
He doesn't even know what we're talking about.
I know.
I have no idea. Yeah.
He's this super awesome athlete. Anyway, they were playing Wake Forest. They go to break, and then they had this huge amount of advertising for them in ESPN Plus. I don't really have a direction to start the conversation, Phoenix, but I'll go with you in this way. It's been interesting to see the marriage, right? And already it feels kind of like it felt when we saw UFC jump from then Spike TV to Fox. Are you excited about it? Are you nervous? How are you feeling about that?
I love every single thing about it. And I'll tell you why, and it's for selfish reasons. Many years ago, when I first, one of my first on-camera gigs was I did something for ESPN, and they had 0 fight sports, on there. 0, right? And I went and I did this show, and then the show got canceled because it got bought by Disney or whatever, and it was like, wow, they really seriously have no MMA. It was almost like they didn't care about it. So all of a sudden, see it go from Fox, which made it even more legit, to ESPN shows it's even more legit as a sport. The thing so that's all the pluses, because ESPN has produced some beautiful content as well, and I really like all the behind the scenes stuff and stories, and we want that for the fighters too. We want more stories, we want more exposure for them, and I think ESPN may be able to do that. I would never watch Fox Sports 1 if the UFC wasn't on it. So because I don't watch any other sport. Football to me is guys running on a giant ruler. I don't know anything. So it's fun. But the negative is going to ESPN and ESPN Plus is that my friends who aren't into fight sports but know that that's what I do aren't going to be like, oh, I wound up watching some fight because I was passing it on a channel. That's the only thing that worries me, is it might not get the people who randomly come across it if they're not people who go and click on or watch ESPN. So that's my only thing I'm worried about. But content-wise or exposure or creating content for the fighters, yeah, man, I think it's really cool.
Chuck, what's going to happen to the sport in the ESPN age?
There's a sense of graduation to it, I think. There's they went one route, and that was really cool to see. Now they're at ESPN, and you know that Dana White, I think, has secretly, or not even so secretly, wanted to be on this platform for a long time. I can remember seeing him at UFC 134, and he was mad that...
Which one was that?
That was the one in Rio. That was the only time I went to a Brazil trip, but he was backstage, and we were talking, and he was saying... I was with ESPN at the time, and he was basically like, can't we get, one of the tabs on their homepage, on their website? Why do we have to be buried on these things? And you're like, because without saying it, you're like, well, it's because they don't care about MMA over there. You know what I mean? They had basic coverage. We had a couple of writers, and there was MMA Live. It's fun for me. There's a part of me that wants to, that always wanted to see this, where the ESPN was going to be more vested in it and bring it on. And you're seeing the guys like Dustin Poirier and those guys all doing the da-da-da. And there's something about it that feels like a graduation to me. It just feels like they finally made it to there. So I like that. I still celebrate those little small victories in this weird way, vicariously, because I was a part of ESPN's coverage, and now, of course, I'm still writing about the sport. So there's all kinds of mixed emotions about that, but at the same time, I'm like, it seems really cool, and I think that it has some hope to it. And I think that that's my initial reaction, is it feels like it's hopeful.
Yeah.
Sonny?
For me, it's kind of getting the nod from the American sports culture, right? Okay, yeah, you're part of, all the other sports now. I feel like the Fox era brought on, especially going from Spike, because Spike was kind of fringy channel and had Mansers and all these crazy other shit there. And now with, going over to Fox, it kind of put a suit and tie, okay, now we're professional. With ESPN, I feel like you still keep that, but it's kind of letting the hair down a bit. Okay, we're part of the sports culture. This is normal. This is normal to watch. So I kind of get that feel, and I feel like that's what it's going to bring, which I'm excited for. And yeah, I feel like it's just going to get more fun.
Can UFC get by with pushing around ESPN, because that was a big thing.
I think they can.
And I think that's what's interesting too, and I'm getting kind of an indication that they're going to do exactly the same thing.
You know what's interesting about this time at ESPN? I was listening to your friend Brian Curtis from The Ringer. He was on Bill Simmons' podcast, and they were talking about the NBA and the ESPN and NBA. So they were not talking about anybody else, not NFL, not MMA. And they were saying they had detected, not that there was an edict that had come down from top to bottom, but that they had kind of detected that the ESPN, NBA reporters and the media figures involved kind of took a less adversarial role at times. I mean, it was always a dual role where they were partly adversarial and then they would just go cover the games. And they were saying, they were theorizing was, in an era where ESPN, let's say 2011 or something, was just this juggernaut, they could kind of afford to push around their own broadcast partners. But, when you're losing millions of subscribers to cord cutting, you need these sports entities. So they feel like the new ESPN, at least insofar as the NBA is concerned, they're a little bit less look the other way kind of thing when something goes down. I don't know if I've detected that enough. I haven't really watched ESPN in that sense, but I will say this. everyone was like, oh, well, UFC's going to ESPN. They're going to have to clean up their act. Bro, they haven't cleaned up their act at all. Like, they have... Guys still do basically whatever they want. Greg Hardy's in the co-main event.
That very first show.
Now, I'll get to that second part. You guys know what's going to be in the rundown. I don't want to get to that just yet, but I just feel like, we're asking how will things be different in the ESPN age. ESPN has a much greater news apparatus than Fox Sports ever did. But if you don't cover them anymore than just as your broadcast partner, I'm not sure how much it really changes, to be quite. We feel it changes. Are we partly imagining things?
To be seen.
Last note on this, ESPN 2 is now lower ranked than FS1. Keep that in mind a little bit.
Yeah.
What do you think? That's a long-winded soliloquy, but...
Yeah. I mean, UFC played a role, obviously, in that being the case. So it'd be interesting just to see how.
If they had gone at the time they had signed with Fox Sports, I think that would have been real arm twisting. But in this new era, I'm not so sure.
I'm getting used to how everything changes, It's like how we went from CDs to now digital streaming. It's almost the same exact thing. You even think about Disney has its own streaming service now, so it's pulling all the cool stuff off of Netflix, like the Daredevils, and I had to find a way to talk about comic books in this. Sorry.
Yeah, there it
is. But what I'm saying is that everything on TV now is a la carte. Like, that's just the way it seems to be going. But I wonder how they're going to get new fans that are not ESPN people.
Right.
That's the only thing that makes me a little bit nervous about this.
So what's weird about this upcoming event on the 19th is I understand it. The prelims will air on ESPN Plus, the first stage of them.
Right.
Then the second set will air on ESPN. Then the main card goes back to ESPN
We're
Plus.
back to this?
Yeah.
It's like with Fox Sports 1,
the streaming
I
service.
go to the bathroom, I come back, there's NASCAR on. I'm like, wait, what channel do I put on now? So it's that again, okay.
Yeah, basically. Let me do this. Let's run down the panel. Danny, everybody give me one big prediction for the UFC in the ESPN era in terms of the two entities. What's one thing that happens to the UFC in the ESPN era?
I think it's going to get accepted more as a sport. I feel like for a while it was always looked as a fringe, something fringy, something like, oh, let's look at cage fighting, something you do every now and then. Now we're going to see it more, and I feel like the Fox era brought professionalism. I think the ESPN era is going to bring fun. It's going to bring more acceptance into the sports culture.
I'm going to piggyback off what you said. I think the Fox stuff was the training wheels for the professionalism in the sport. And I think with WEMING and ESPN and the way things are going, the entertainment industry or the entertainment part of it will get bigger. Hopefully in a good way, not the bad way that we're all afraid of. But I think that might give more exposure to some fighters and make them more of a legit sport from other things.
I think Nate Diaz, when that camera finds, going to spark that J for real this time.
Yeah.
And that will be fun.
I do think that the association of ESPN has always been big. It doesn't even matter if it's bowling or whatever it is. When things are on ESPN, there's a sense to it from a common. It just has that sort of gravity to it. So I think whatever was keeping the UFC on the outside of that, and I don't know how much that was, because they were showing plenty of highlights. There's been plenty of coverage over the last few years. I think it's going to cross over a little bigger. I think that'd be the initial thing. And then beyond that, I don't know, man, because we have so many changing technologies and everything else going on. It's just wait and see on the rest of it.
It is the big unknown.
Yeah.
I mentioned the Greg Hardy thing. There was a column this week, what am I saying? It was New Year's Eve day. There was a column in MMA Junkie written by Ben Folks, and I thought this was one of the smartest columns I had read in so long. Now, I actually disagreed with some of his analysis about why it was happening, but that it was happening and the way he crystallized it, I thought was totally true, which was basically, in shorthand, has the UFC become immune and certainly non-responsive to controversy or even to a degree fan backlash? And I think that to a degree they have. It is a very, very interesting piece. If you've not read it, I highly encourage you to go check that out. But here's what I sort of want to ask you guys about it, and I wanted to have a little bit of a discussion on the panel, because I certainly have my own ideas about it. But Chuck, I'll go to you first. I think you read the piece as well. You have the situation where Greg Hardy is going to be in the co-main event. ESPN doesn't seem to care. They're not serving as a check on this at all. In fact, they might even like it, to be quite candid with you. And you have the situation where they just up and move a thing to accommodate an anti-doping challenge. And some of the fans got mad, and they just went ahead and did it anyway. And you could pick any number of these things. I do think, my read on this is that to a degree, they have seen a bifurcation between media outrage and market response. And so they're like, why do we need to pay attention if the market doesn't care? But I'm wondering what you make of this. Why is this happening?
One of the interesting things in that column was he points to a New York Times column about Facebook, and he talks about how at some point you stop listening to criticism because it's not well-founded criticism. There's just too many chirping voices, not a lot of vital ingredients there to get any positive criticism from. But at the cost of basically weeding out, you don't want to listen to real criticism, the stuff you should hear. And I feel like that is kind of what the UFC, this is last year, there's been multiple things. That was what was good about that column, because he kind of went down a lot of the strange things that the UFC was kind of like, we'll up and move the event over to California, and who cares about the backlash? It's almost like a defiance, but I almost believe that it's just, I believe it's just at some point Dana White is, because he said in that piece too, he's about talking about like hey, I make a decision, we roll, we don't look back.
I don't care about anyone's opinion.
I kind of think he really is thinking that way, though. I mean, and it's really strange because they are hitting these brand new broad frontiers, and they're hitting the ground running, obviously, with ESPN and all this. But you're like, how is that? That's going to be really interesting if the fans no longer have a voice in this. That is a strange thing. Why did the sport become why did UFC become what it was? Because it was almost like a democracy or something. Like it was almost like Dana would take input from all corners and do the right thing. He was always kind of matching what the most people wanted. You know what I mean? I feel like that's a bygone era, and that's a little bit of a dangerous ground. I always worry about the chipping away at the hardcore fan base, because if you start to isolate them, they don't feel like they're involved. I don't know where, what happens to the sport at some point. Does it start to dissolve, or does it pick up new vitality? I don't know. But I think it's a dangerous thing not to listen to media, not to listen to fans, to just completely kind of shut it out and just do your thing. You know what I mean? And they're doing that right now with the Hardy fight. I mean, it's almost like it's not even defiance. It's just, they're just like, no, that's what we're doing. It's like there's no emotion to it.
Right.
They're just putting it on.
We're not doing this to spite you.
Yeah.
We're just doing this because we're going to do it.
I do feel that they did put something out to try to was sort of a press thing to try to negate the situation. So saying that like Rachel being on the same card as Greg Hardy, there were articles that came out, or Dana even said Rachel forgives the situation and says that everybody deserves a second chance. And it was kind of the way of saying like, hey, we're addressing this, and we're addressing this with the person who would be the most sensitive towards the situation. And that's what got put out there. And we're not going to talk about it after that. And in some ways, as a woman and with the Me Too movement going on, I understand everybody's sensitivity, but I also try to think that there are certain people who should be forgiven. I would forgive the situation more if I heard something from this guy saying, hey man, I completely made a mistake. Martial arts has helped me revitalize my life, deal with my anger issues. Because I do know people who have used martial arts as a tool to help them get through a lot of things in life. And I think I'd be more forgiving of the situation. But I don't want to think that they didn't address it, having Rachel be the person. I don't know if she was pressured. I don't think so, to be the one to say it. I think that kind of made me go, okay, let me think about this for a second.
Well, I think Rachel's also put in a weird spot, because in a way, if you take the other route and you say you're not okay with it, you're going against your boss's decisions.
Right.
And we know, I mean, we just talked about how Colby was wronged. We know that, if you have certain tensions with the UFC, sometimes things don't go your way, right?
Yeah, you fear saying anything that you fear.
I mean, but she could also very well believe,
right.
what she's saying, like, to be true. So I don't know that. But back to, like, the criticism part. The UFC is a business, and the main point of a business is to make money.
Right.
And, I see people on the timeline going, oh, how could the UFC change the event? This is, so wrong. Fast forward 6 days later, they're doing, John Jones is awesome, hashtag UFC 232. So if people are still buying the pay-per-views, if people are still tuning in,
I'm so mad at John Jones, I'm going to buy this in HD.
Like
exactly.
a horrible,
not even on standard, man.
A super horrible example of this, but an example of this, R. Kelly's record sales went up.
I know.
Isn't that nuts?
I think that's I have a theory about that. My theory is that people have heard this R. Kelly controversy, and there's old people like me being like, back in my day.
Who's R. Kelly?
And they want to hear
Who's that R. Kelly?
They want to hear who R. Kelly was. Like,
Maybe.
I don't think people Danny's age are like bumping,
or they're reading into the lyrics.
I can fly or something.
But
here's my read on this whole thing is beyond sort of what's already been stated. I'm with you, by the way, on the Rachel Ostovich thing. It's like, number one, show me another sports league that would have done that. I mean, not one of them would have done that.
Yeah.
Probably because they would have faced more public scrutiny about it. I think that's one thing.
Yeah.
But what about the dude Pac-Man in the NFL who shot up a bunch of people who's still playing?
Pac-Man Jones?
Yeah.
Pac-Man Jones did you see the fight he was in the Atlanta airport?
No.
Someone started a fight with him and Pac-Man slapped him. I was like, you know what, Pac-Man, maybe you're not a bad guy after all. They got the whole thing on camera. Look, the NFL certainly is a greasy operation as well, but just the optics of it would look so... I mean, the NFL got rid of Greg Hardy, for crying out loud.
Yeah.
So
That's really weird.
Just consider
He's
that.
not there for a reason.
Yeah.
Just consider that for a moment. And like the point is with her, it's like, number one, she makes hardly any money. And already if you're in a situation where you do want to talk back against your boss, the question to Dana would have been, well, what if she had said no? Would you not have done it? Like that's like, oh, we asked her and it just so happened that her position accommodated our business interest. Right. But what if they wouldn't have? What would you have done? They still would have done. I mean, maybe the answer is they would have listened. I don't know. I just think it's worth listening. For me, when we talk about this from the media perspective, because part of it is the fans, it's like, okay, so I'm in DC, right? How do you lose a fan base? Dan Snyder's done a pretty good job. No, I'm being serious about this.
I saw the attendance of that game.
The attendance has gone from about 90,000 a game to about 60,000 a game, right? So they've lost almost a third of their entire audience at games. Ratings are down everywhere. People aren't buying merchandise. And you could say, oh, it's about the manufactured PC outrage about the name. No, it's not, dude. It's about the fact that team sucks year after year after year on the field. But here's how Dana can get around all of that. Even if the fans get bitter that you moved from Vegas to California, you're still putting on huge fights.
The product's still good.
The product's still pretty good. I think they basically realized, we've got you right by the stones.
It's
And
true.
there's really not much you can do about it. So the fans are just kind of like, whatever. On the media side, I got to be honest, there are some, not that I'm sitting on stories, that's not quite true. But I wonder, what's the best way to do confrontational media? Because I worry in this age of everyone just doesn't care anymore, including the UFC, if you put out a story and it's not sufficiently, Catholic abuse scandal, people will just be like, it's not that big a deal. And now all the people you're trying to do actual media reporting on, they've been immunized by this. That's what I worry about.
Yeah.
Fair concern or no?
No, I think it's fair. Yeah. I also... Fighting, right? It's fighting. So it's like, this is a game that's always been full of rejects and second chances and revival stories. And guys like Greg Hardy make their way to this sport for whatever reason. There's also, I think, from a casual standpoint, this idea, if maybe even from a hardcore standpoint, like, he may get his ass kicked. And I always feel like that's one of those things that really is hard to quantify. You know what I mean? Like, you think about that and you're like, well, some people just want to see him get beat up. And I think sometimes the UFC really thinks about that. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So it's just something on this card, because it almost makes no sense for him to be on this card in general. Just the association, ESPN's association to Greg Hardy is not going to be positive. The whole thing, leaving the NFL.
And also, has he earned
exactly.
it?
Has
have you fought enough to be on the first card of ESPN? Have you earned that?
It's very strange, but I do think that stuff like that factors into their decision.
All right, well, look, it's a different story that we'll follow as the year progresses. But let's talk about this. Speaking of ESPN's first show, not the one on ESPN Plus, but the main one in February, Cain Velasquez. Cain Velasquez is coming back, ladies and gentlemen. He'll be fighting Francis Ngannou. It'll be in Arizona, a place where he grew up and went to college, the whole 9 yards. Our own Sean El-Shadi has a great article where he followed Cain around and his trainer, Javier Mendez from American Kickboxing Academy. It's a phenomenal piece, so please go check that out. But in any case, speaking to the story, Cain Velasquez is coming back. Let me pitch the story to you like this, Phoenix. Number one, how excited are you for the return of Cain Velasquez? And by that, I mean not just you, but what do you detect around you? How do you think the fan base is? And number two, what is realistically possible with his return here? What can he really do with the time he has at 35, 36 years old remaining?
Well, look at Daniel Cormier. He's 40, right? And I think, what was it that he didn't get cleared because he had like bone spurs in his back? That was like 2.5 years ago. That was the time like he was going to fight, and then Nevada wouldn't clear him because of that. So coming from my previous gigs were sports science background, this time off might be a great Cain. And also even Mendez saying that they've changed the way they do their sports conditioning. The Performance Institute. We might see, I mean, remember how dominant he was? How great he was? Those skills aren't going to go away. He might be completely refreshed and revitalized. And this might be wishful thinking from my part as a Cain fan, but from everyone I've talked to about this situation, people are super excited to see him, and they're not giving Ngannou a chance in hell against a revitalized Cain. And if you've ever competed, sometimes time off can be the best possible thing for you. I think he feels invigorated. I feel like he's had time with his family. I read the article. I thought it was brilliantly written. I really hope that we get the Cain that I really want to see, and that he's 100% healthy and ready to go. Maybe he gets 4 or 5 fights in. That's a lot considering the age, but you know, I always use Cormier as an example, especially coming out of a similar camp. Can he do it? I hope so.
It's the right time, right? Because his buddy, who doesn't want to trespass upon, is probably leaving the game at some point this year. You know what I mean? It's the right time for Cain to make his move, and I hope you're right about that. Because, I mean, if you look at he's had like one legitimate loss in the UFC. That was the Verdum fight. If you look at, I mean, even that first one where he got caught, I mean, he had a busted knee, right? Like, it was on the first one, he vindicated himself twice. And he went through a couple of, he got nicked up a bit in those fights. He's had some wars, and I think that there's a little bit of like a feeling to him, just knowing his intensity, the kind of competitor is, that it probably will be, I think it probably was good for him. It's like, almost like if you're going to bet money on the fight, you'd be thinking in that way. I think that you'd be like, my money's on Cain Velasquez looking like, you know, reborn Cain Velasquez coming out every bit as intense. But I maybe that's wishful thinking, but I suspect that'll be the case. But it's good to have him back. I mean, I like having conversations where he's in that picture, because it always felt like he was, if not the best, he was right there among the best for the last, almost decade. I mean, he's been up there for a while.
I spoke to Sean on my radio show, Danny, and I asked him, is Cain aware that there was this time where everyone was like, oh, he's on the verge of becoming the greatest, and then through injury and loss and time off, not that people said no, but they just kind of shelved him for a minute. And I asked him if he was aware, and his answer was, if he's aware, he certainly doesn't act like it. Yeah. So I'm wondering, competitively, he can become champion again. Is that enough to become the GOAT heavyweight? Can he be the GOAT heavyweight? What's realistic here?
I think it's possible. I think he was right on the verge, and for a while he was sort of the face of the heavyweight division. Yeah. And man, his performances against Junior Dos Santos, where you look at Junior and you're like, man, Cain just did that. Like, he's the best heavyweight, right? He's the best heavyweight out there. But injuries, a bunch of stuff just kept him out of the cage. I think he knows that, especially, and I think fans forgot about him a little bit with the right reason. Obviously, Stipe going in there and breaking that record. I think if Cain goes in there and keeps racking up wins and he's able to stay healthy, man, he can really cement himself as one of the greats.
He acquired that big fight feel. When he was fighting JDS, in those fights, they had a nice feel to them. Those felt like events to me when he was fighting. And you know, the Brock Lesnar fight, you know, and those type of fights.
Yeah, that was big.
They just felt big, and I felt like that stuff, when you go away, is what you got to rebuild, right? Like, can he become that guy that you don't want to miss fight again? And I think he can, because he's never really looked otherwise. Maybe that Verdum fight, but again with the sea-level Cain and all this stuff. But just that one, really. I mean, the rest of the time, and again, I know you pay attention on a level of skills and what they've been doing. He was
far ahead of the game.
Yeah,
far ahead.
So I feel like I'd be surprised if we don't see that version of him.
Can I ask you a question? Maybe it applies to both of you. How do you feel about him being like this avatar of Latino representation in the UFC? When he was the champ, when he just beat Brock Lesnar, my God, it was a UFC 121. That he had that house rocking with tons of like flag waving, Chicano Americans or Mexicans or whoever. And since he departed, the good news is that they've got much heavier into Latin America. On the other hand, there hasn't been quite that standout figure, or maybe I'm missing something. Danny, how do you feel about that?
Yeah, I think when he was on at the time, there wasn't MMA in Latin America wasn't as developed, so we didn't have all these fighters. The Ultimate Fighter Latin America wasn't even a thing. He was the coach of the first Latin America.
That's right. Good call.
He was a representative for all Latin Americans, although he's more of a representative of the Mexican Americans. And I feel like he still has that, and a lot of people still support him. And also throughout the years, I interviewed him like early, and like his Spanish was not good, and man, he got good. His Spanish got really, really good. Yeah. And I feel like there is some sort of representation. And in the heavyweight division, I mean, there was recently Juan Espino, who's from Spain and won the Ultimate Fighter. Sure, but he's not obviously that big of a figure. But as far as like big characters in the heavyweight division, I mean, he's
his
the guy.
issue is really not having charisma,
Yeah.
right? Like I say when he has big fight feel, it's like you think about the way he fights and like his kind of opposition, knowing he was like this cardio machine who was going to go right at you, just relentless. But in terms of his charisma, this was always he's just he's not
just
going
like
to do that on his own.
The gentle giant,
Yes, he is.
that's kind of how he's
Very
always come
low
off.
key, and
But he
soft.
always felt like he was brooding, and of all the guys you could figure, like Conor McGregor is like a bash you over the head nationalist, right? Yeah. And I'm not saying it's good or bad, that's just his style.
Good for him.
Cain was the exact opposite.
Yeah.
Cain was just this pillar of quiet strength that so many people loved. And, is a Santiago Ponzinibbio possible without a Cain Velasquez? Probably, but he certainly, I think, greased the wheels a little bit.
Yeah, he was definitely a big push for that. Because, again, he was like the first, representative of Latin America that, that was at the top, and now we're starting to see that with Ponzinibbio and a few other guys.
Sliding doors.
Yeah.
You'd like to have seen what happens if he beats Verdum in Mexico. What happens?
Yeah.
Like
Wow,
you're
good
not
point.
you're
Yeah.
not sure kind of how a star would have blown up at that point.
Yeah, so we'll see what happens. I'm so excited to see what he's got coming back, and that's a really interesting thing to pay attention to in 2019 as well. Here's another one. Boy, John Jones making a quick return. I got to say, I love this. He'll be taking on Anthony Smith, UFC 235, March 2nd. I don't have to go to Vegas because that's the day of my baby shower. Hey! Pretty excited about that. In any event, so he's coming right back around, Chuck. I got to tell you, here's why I love it. Tell me if you agree or disagree. Right. Number one, if you're the UFC, having John Jones back, Dana White said it. He goes, I would love to get this guy out there and keep him busy.
Yeah.
My man's had a lot of time off. So he's ready to get back in there. I just love the readiness, number one. Yeah. Number two, we have people like, I don't think the Anthony Smith fight's all that competitive. Look, I don't know how competitive it is, but the odds makers, they don't think it's competitive. I don't care.
Right.
What we miss in MMA is a champion saying, I'm ready to go. That bus is going to be here. You be here. And constantly defending titles.
Not even what we miss, what we need.
What we need.
Yeah.
It's good for divisions. It's good for Anthony Smith. He gets a big opportunity. It's good for John Jones if he wins. It gives the UFC a little latitude as well. Yeah. What's bad about this?
Nothing. I agree with you every point you just made, and I love it because it has an old school feeling of like there's just a contender, maybe a woodwork contender a little bit, a guy you haven't really paid, you know he's on a streak, but then he gets into this moment and he just boom, he's there. Now it's your chance, go do it, and I love that. I've always loved that. That's the way they used to do it. They didn't really name didn't matter as much as merit at some point in the UFC, or it mattered equally. A lot of guys. There were plenty of guys, Gray Maynards and those guys who snuck, they made their way to title shots. Would they do that now? This feels like kind of a return to that a little bit, especially a guy like Anthony Smith, who, if you followed he was kind of a journeyman, and here he is, resurrected in this spot. I love this story, man. I mean, it's kind of, I saw somebody mention it, David versus Glaff. I always love that feel. A guy who has, his chance to do something with the big stage, just like that.
I think a big issue that it's coming up in these recent years is that now if you look at every division, there's like 3, 4, 5 deserving contenders. And why is that? Because the champion is not actively defending the belt. Yeah. The champion is either going up to taking a super fight, dropping down, or some legend with the big names coming in and jumping the queue. And all of a sudden, you just get a buildup of contenders, and either they knock each other off, or you're in a position where you're doing somebody wrong by giving any contender a title.
And there's also, factor in that 205 has just been this ridiculous top for a long time. No new contenders, really. And then you have like 2 guys kind of swapping belts. One guy losing and one guy pick it back up. You know what I mean? And it's just gone on like that for so long. It's nice to just have a clear channel for once, where you're like, okay, wait, there's a contender, there's a champion, now they're going to fight. It feels like a breath of fresh air.
I completely agree. I think what people are complaining about is it just feels like Anthony Smith took a huge step up in competition just because of how dominant John is when he does fight, if he is there. But I still think it's a really good matchup. I really think that Anthony Smith is going to be the type of person that's going to just take it to John, who is very good in the clinch, who does have good Muay Thai, who is going to try to use that, who's going to try to get inside. John, again, will have to, and this is what I really like about their team, is how they break things down. I mean, the first thing that John posted when this fight came up was got a lot of homework to do. And I was like, see, that's interesting to me.
By the way, I'm told that at Jackson's, he is probably the most voracious consumer of tape.
I mean, he already posted a picture of tape of Anthony Smith.
Yeah, and I'm told that he might be the best at watching tape. I had 2 different people independently tell me he's better than Greg Jackson at breaking down tape.
Wow, that's really cool.
Yeah.
Anyway, sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off. I apologize.
No, but that's going right along with what I'm saying. I mean, as there are people who fight differently, and it's based off of your personality. I will hear people who say, I don't watch, I just listen to my coaches. And that makes them feel confident because they don't overthink. I hear from other people, I watch everything, I break down strategy, I know what I want to do with my camp, but there's a flow to it, and that works for them too. So it really just depends on the fighter's personality, which side of it gives them confidence. Yeah. I think that the really understanding every single move on the chessboard for John is what gives him confidence.
Also, I just want to add one quick thing. I think it's also great for John Jones' legacy and how he's being perceived. I don't know about you guys, but I get a different feel of the current champs that we're seeing rather than like an Anderson Silva, a GSP that just racked up title defenses.
Yeah.
Even
That's a
Demetrius
great
Johnson.
point, Danny.
Yeah.
And I don't know, this is the route. Like if you really want to be the GOAT, I don't know, in some ways.
Clean it out.
In some ways I kind of see just racking up title defenses in a different way than the champs. The champs, there's always like a little asterisk there.
Because you can't even hold it for very long. They just take the title from you anyway. You know what I mean? It's impossible to do.
Clean out the division.
I mean, he aged all those old legends that were in the 205 division. He aged them in dog years, essentially, because he looks so much above and beyond where they are. So there's a small crop of other guys now who's ready for chances. But going back to the competitive thing, who would he fight that would seem competitive at 205? I almost feel like you could plug in anybody in that top 10, and it would be basically the same thing. So it has to go down to you have a dominant guy and you have everybody else.
But the whole point of a division is like, look, if you're a contender and you beat everyone in front of you, again, that's a little bit debatable, but look, you beat enough guys to get to the front of the queue, you are owed a title opportunity. Yep. Whether you or I or whoever thinks it's competitive is irrelevant. Right. You have earned that moment. And moreover, Matt Brown said something to me a long time ago about Stephen Wonderboy Thompson. This was back when Jones fought Rashad in Atlanta. This was, I think that was Thompson's debut or the one no, he beat Dan Stigen first time, so it was like the next fight or whatever.
Beautiful knockout.
Yeah. And he said, look, man, I don't know much about his kickboxing career, but here's what I know. You go 50, 60 fights and you win them all. You mean to tell me he showed up every day feeling great? He wasn't ever injured. He wasn't ever sick. He wasn't ever sad. He didn't have any personal issues. No. There were times he showed up and he felt awful and he still won. That is, to me, the real test, to your point, about just getting out there time after time. And also, the thing about John Jones is, look, is the USADA issue going to pop up again? Right. Quite literally, I have no idea. God, I effing hope not. But here's the thing to consider. Getting back out there and being frequent, I think the fans will appreciate that. Yeah. I think we talked about it before. What do they appreciate? The UFC brass? How you accommodate their schedule? He's like, I'm ready to go, boss. He might, it's a big if, buy himself some goodwill. Yeah. It's possible.
Yeah, for sure.
Speaking of somebody else, real quickly, I'm going to change the order here on the rundown. Anthony Smith, I had him on my radio show, and we went 15 minutes, and then he interrupts me and goes, are we really not going to gloss over the fact that Luke Rockhold is an a-hole? And I was like, well, I wouldn't quite position it in that way, because I had Luke Rockhold on the MMA Hour earlier in the day. But Luke Rockhold, you know what? Making some interesting noise. It looks like he's going to go to 225. Nothing really on the cards yet. He said he couldn't do first quarter 2019, but maybe second, third is going to open up at 205. We're talking about who is John Jones going to fight. Boy, have I got some good news. Yep. Danny, are you as excited about Luke Rockhold jumping up as I am?
I'm extremely excited. And I feel like a lot of middleweights should look at Anthony Smith, should look at Luke Rockhold and take, follow their steps. Because I feel like at middleweight, there's so much talent up there. And I feel like you can, like even a Chris Weidman, you can just go to 205 and all of a sudden you have a brand new career. Mm-hmm. And this is exciting. I think, Luke Rockhold is a very interesting character. And I feel like even with the move, even on the show, he was like super excited and he was cracking jokes.
He was smiling and laughing.
Yeah. Oh, I was talking to him on the phone, writing him up to get on the show, and he was just in a good mood, and the Skype wasn't really working. That's why we took a while. He's like, wait, no, hang up, call me on the phone. Like, he
was into it.
Yeah, because he was on the iPad. So yeah, I don't know. This is just something, really refreshing, and we know how hard those weight cuts are. Yeah. We know how hard weight cuts can affect chins as well, and we know that's been a big thing surrounding his career as well. And man, I know John Jones is super talented, but take away the stand up, you put them on the ground. I mean, anybody on the bottom and Luke Rockhold on top. I mean, there's questions there. So I'm excited.
I think people forget how good Luke is because of the knockouts that he's had, because those knockouts are so bad. Like, they're so bad. And they're so scary that people forget all of the things that he is capable of. I will say that I like that the sports science is now evolving and changing and growing, and we have a better understanding. And I'm going to steal something that Michael Chiesa said because I completely agree with him. He said the old school way of thinking was cut down to weight, be the bigger guy on fight night. The newer school of thinking is that let me find the healthy way and try to be in my own weight, and everybody should be there because nobody wants to feel like crap in there, and they're fighting just to survive. They're not fighting with their heads. And I really believe that we're starting to finally understand the proper way to weight cuts and these divisions. I do wish that there were more divisions. I don't know if that's ever going to happen. I know that like Dana thinks that's a lot more work, but for the safety and the health of our fighters, I really like the idea of people not feeling like death before they compete. I want my fighters at 100%. I want to see what they can do. And I also don't want to have it was the weight cut excuse after a performance. And if you can take that away, we might have some more interesting fights.
Also, let me just say this. Forget about the skills. Forget about the health, right? For a second. Isn't it just interesting? Like, I feel like Luke Rockhold brings like an interesting trash talk, like already calling John Jones princes and I'm coming for you.
He's so arrogant and it's so great.
And it's great, yeah. And also, don't forget, Rockhold and DC are boys.
Yeah, I know.
Right.
So there's also a bunch of storylines.
This is the point I'm going up. It's one thing for the health issue that she's identifying, which is great in its own way. He's lifting weights, which I think is going to be tremendous to see how he looks.
Too, man. Luke
Rockhold is a big dude already. So like, him to be putting on weight with the muscles, it's going to be crazy. But on top of that, you've already got the Anthony Smith fight lined up. And if you can keep winning, do him versus John Jones and the whole AKA revenge angle, this is what the dreams are made of.
And besides, what your point is, it's healthier for him mentally because you realize how mired he was in some of his rivalries at 185. He let them affect him, man. I mean, he was like so into the Bisping thing. He felt like it was affecting his life. Like he was just, he's one of those guys who broods and he goes over things so much in his own head and obsesses over it. Like, it's better for him to just wipe the slate clean and try again. I really believe you're going to get, a better version of him, healthy, like mentally too, because he's going to let that be a past chapter.
I ran into Luke Rockhold at the MMA Awards, maybe, 2-3 years ago, something like that. He was fun, cracking jokes, having a good time. He was having a couple cocktails, but he was not drunk. He was just being fun. If you interview him on Fight Week, he's a completely different person.
Definitely.
That cut destroys him.
I worked with him a few times because we both worked for Adidas at the time, and he was doing a photo shoot for Adidas, and like he was literally just
that ugly guy for what?
He was just eating broccoli, like that's what he was eating. But he was just super nice, super charismatic. You know who it reminds me of, and I don't mean this as an insult, it's just kind of funny. In Beauty of the Beast, no one looks like Gaston. You know that character?
I certainly do not, no.
Anyway, that's what he reminds me of. If you Google Gaston.
Oh, Gaston, that was the handsome guy.
Yeah, right.
And she was supposed to,
Right. Yeah. So that's what he reminds me of. But I just was like, was he out of nowhere calling out or talking smack about Anthony Smith? Like, what prompted him to talk about him?
Dan, if you want.
Well, on the MMA Hour, he was just like, and he made a good point. He's like, Anthony Smith couldn't even sniff, a top 10 middleweight. And, now he's getting a title shot at light heavyweight. And then, all fairness, you said, well, as you were saying, maybe he was depleting himself. And he's like, well, I was depleting myself and look where I got.
I was depleted and also champion.
Exactly.
Okay.
It's like I had skills, I had other ways, a bunch of things. I'm not, trying to say anything negative about Anthony Smith. I'm just saying, he sees these things like, okay, well, he's doing really good at 185 and he was depleting himself. Look how far I got. Right. I got, to hold the title. Let's see what I can do at 205.
I can't wait. Yeah. I can't wait. There's a bunch of stuff I wanted to get to. We lost time on, so it'll have to wait until next time, including Amanda Nunes, I think, turning a corner. Just a quick note on this. I did a segment on what should be next for Amanda Nunes on my radio show, which I normally wouldn't do, but it's sort of a slow week, and I just wanted to figure it out. And the phone lines exploded. Let me explain how this works. That never happens. The phone lines explode for 3 people. 1, Ronda Rousey, Conor McGregor, and Brock Lesnar. Yeah. John Jones when he gets in trouble. That's it. And they went, what? Like that. And here's how bad it was. We would take a call. Here's John in Ohio. And as soon as I'd hang up on him, the line would go green again with someone calling. Shocking amount of. So they got that show is supposed to happen 237 in Brazil. They want to put it in Curitiba in the stadium. I'm just very quickly. I have no idea how you do that show without doing a rematch between Cyborg and Nunes. That's where Cyborg is from. 2 Brazilians. By the way, it'd be an all-female main and co-main event, which would be kind of amazing to watch. I think Amanda Nunes has, I don't know if she's like turned into superstar. It's different.
Her biggest problem was, first impressions. We basically knew her as just part of this faceless mask behind Ronda Rousey. When you'd hear her name, but you didn't really put any import behind it. She had to dawn on people, and I think that, to your point, I think she did. I think that we saw it a little bit with Ronda Rousey, but I think there was an asterisk that Rousey was a shell of herself, but then she goes and does this thing to Cyborg. I agree with you 100%. I think she turned the corner. She dawned on everybody like, hey, man, this was the one who was, this is the one who is better than all of them. That type of situation,
And I feel like she might have not gotten the Ronda Rousey rub as like Holly Holm did as far as superstar, but I kind of feel like she got the Chris Cyborg rub as far as like, you guys remember that scene of Boys in the Hood where the kids are like, y'all want to see a dead body, and they go to the train tracks? It's kind of that way. Like, you want to see, like, that's the way, like, because Cyborg was never a big star as far as like her promotion and talking like that. But like, you were like, okay, you want to see someone get, messed up? You go watch Cyborg fight, and I feel like that's the case with Amanda now. Like, her striking, she was quick, powerful. Like, dude, you want to see like maybe some crazy knockout? Dude, go watch Amanda Nunes.
I'll never doubt her again.
No.
Never doubt her again.
In a gunfight, see what happens. You're going to end up looking at the lights fast. All right. With that being said, let's very quickly do this. Time now for Under the Radar, a story. It can be small, whatever. Just something in a week like this that kind of passed through that maybe people didn't pay attention to. We'll start on the end. Chuck, what is Under the Radar?
I remember, Joe Lozon had a sick kid, and I saw that his kid was cancer-free, got the call, basically, and I know that we followed this story, and I know that a lot of his motivation over the last few years has been, to do it for his son and all that. So I just wanted to say, like, that went under the radar, but that was good news to see that his son has recovered.
Great.
Oh, I like that. Nice feel-good story.
Yeah.
Well, there was one thing I just thought of this morning was, how's TJ's weight cut going? Right?
You see all those pictures?
But
Skeletal.
I have a little bit of faith in him because he has a kinesiology background, and I feel like he's just a super smart guy. But I do want a little bit more from what's going on with that fight, and I don't feel like I'm finding enough of it. So I just go to TJ's page and like try to figure out what's up with that.
Thing he's doing.
By the way, those pictures, I'm told he weighed 138.
Yeah, so he talked to somebody from SiriusXM.
Yeah, he talked to Misha Tate, so he's got 13 pounds to go off of that.
That's crazy.
He's doing I don't know if you guys have ever done sort of like the hormone testing or the hair testing. It will tell you like literally everything that's happening with your body throughout the day through waves and spikes. And like they're doing some crazy science with it.
If you can make the weight and fight, great. But I'm looking at this being like, hey, let's never do that again.
It's a little scary. Yeah.
Danny, what's under the radar?
I'm going to keep it weight cutting related. Mackenzie Dern is sticking to 115, which I think it's very interesting because you got the flyweight division that is up for grabs because it's brand new. You can make a name for yourself there. Although, champion very, very tough and very dominant in Shevchenko. But, man, your last fight, you missed weight by 7 pounds, and you're still taking a crack at 115. I mean, good luck to her. She's made it that way before. Maybe she can continue to do so. But, man, I just thought 125 was a weight class.
Yeah.
And I'll end on this one. It wasn't exactly under the radar, but we didn't get a chance to mention it, so I'll use it here. How about Polyana Viana? Boy.
Okay, so my roommate that doesn't watch any MMA, she was sending me links about that.
No way. Yeah. Okay, so she got mugged for this, or attempted to be mugged for the second time in Brazil. That did not go too well for that gentleman. He ended up getting just knuckled into the dirt. But it actually makes an interesting point here, and I wonder. I bet you agree, but let's see if you do or not. I have long believed that these women's self-defense courses are snake oil salesmen, that they don't really work. You really want to defend yourself, ladies? Make self-defense a part of your life. You have to get involved, and not everyone's going to be Polyana Viana. Okay, all right, fine. Where she's just, a freaking superhero beating up muggers like Bruce Wayne or something. But on the other hand, it does show that a lifetime in training could save your life, and it could do a lot more. Do you agree or disagree?
I do agree, but I'll also say I'd want you to take a self-defense class just so you do something instead of nothing, so that if one thing comes to your mind from that course, to poke in the eye, if you never do anything, then take it. Or maybe taking that course will gateway you into saying, you know what, I really want to learn more than this.
Sure.
So I agree with you, but I also say if you just have an opportunity to take one course, do that too.
The only thing I get bitter about are these people who are like, oh, I'm a women's self-defense expert, and they charge a bunch of money for like not really helping people. That's the one where I get a little angry.
Yeah, I 100% agree with that too.
All right, now we are not done. We have taken your tweets. You have sent them using the hashtag #TheMMABeat. We have put them together. We are going to answer them as in a segment we call After the Beat. Don't go anywhere, because After the Beat and your questions starts right now. And we're back. Luke Thomas, Danny Segura, Phoenix Carnavale, and Chuck Mindenhall. Your name is unusual.
It is?
Yeah.
Okay.
How many Phoenixes have you ever met?
No, none.
Right.
None, yeah.
Case in point.
Well, I'm not a member of the X-Men, unfortunately.
Yeah, no, none of us are. I've met a couple of Lukes out there. I actually met another Luke Thomas once in person. Oh, wow. He had a name tag. I go, what? I was like that Spider-Man meme, like with the two Spider-Man pointing each other. I was like, how is that a thing? And Danny, of course. I mean, there's a million of you.
In class, it was always like Daniel, and there's like 10, like, you know.
Daniel Segura, still three hands.
All right, we have taken your tweets using the hashtag. People always like, why can't I leave you a Facebook message? Because you can't. That's why. Yeah. A tweet using the hashtag #TheMMABeat. We have assembled them now. Let us get to them. What is up first? Okay, Chuck, you're first. Do you or any of the panel have any New Year's resolutions? Love the show. All the best for 2019. We were supposed to do this last. This is a tweet that came today, but we were going to make this a topic. Like, what were your MMA New Year's resolutions? But do you have any sort of broader ones for 2019?
I mean, I tend to make goals, I'd say more so, but I would like to write a book in 2019.
Is that right?
You should.
Fiction, nonfiction?
Nonfiction.
Wow.
Something MMA related, I'm sure, but I'd like to get that done. It's been something that's brewing in the back for a long time, and it just feels like the time is right for
No time like the present,
I would
boy.
buy it.
Yeah, good. There's one.
I would buy it.
I will steal a copy.
Oh, yes. I'll borrow mine.
All right, what about you, Phoenix? Any New Year's resolutions?
I actually want to get and do a lot more jiu-jitsu this year. Yeah. I have a lot of injuries, so...
Did you slack off in 2018?
Yeah, because
you also travel
the
like
travel
a
is
madman.
crazy, but I people invite me to go to their schools, and I get to roll with some really good people, and that's been great. It's honestly, I'm scared of white belts because like you get injured on some weird stuff.
Yeah, they're terrible.
So I have some good friends that are black belts or upper level belts, and they'll show me some stuff, and I really enjoy the sport.
That'd be fun. What about you?
I'm actually gonna do quite the opposite and stay away from
He's gonna come into
jiu-jitsu.
my world.
I got a torn meniscus. My elbows suck just from like 7 years of jiu-jitsu and wrestling. So I'd like to pick up boxing. I don't know. I think 2018 I kind of got more into boxing. Obviously there was really big boxing fights. And yeah, I'd like to pick that up. I feel like it's very healthy to like rehab the body. Plus like I got the ground skills already. Let me build on the stand-up.
Always remember, cardio does nothing for injury prevention. Only strength training does. Just always remember
It's
that.
very true.
What are you saying here, Thomas?
Still got to live.
New Year's resolution. I am trying to get to 100K subscribers on my YouTube channel. That's the one. That's
Where you
the
at?
one. 60, just a shade under 68,000. Getting there.
Well, on your way.
I've projected it. I actually put a spreadsheet together for the last 2 years. So I think I'll get it, but, I've got to be...
Everybody go to Luke's YouTube.
No, I'm not even going to plug it. I mean, the actual name. But yes, that's just a goal to have. I got some other ones too, but whatever. All right, what's next? Are the UFC and USADA beyond trusting at this point, Phoenix? And should USADA part ways with the UFC?
Oh my God. It's
a big question.
This is the area where I feel the dumbest.
Everyone does.
I really don't get it. I will say this. I feel like everyone is figuring it out, even them. And I think like one of the biggest things is really clearly define what's in supplements. I know that what I heard was that the UFC was going to come up with their own supplement line. More money, whatever. So that would be USADA approved. And I try not to be super skeptical and distrusting of every single thing. But I will tell you this, I am lost. Is there any science expert out there who really understands this that could help us?
The reason why people ask that question and there's no answer is because there's no one like that. Mm-hmm. I have tried to make this point, and I to varying degrees of success, I'm sure. But this, I mean, yes, there are scientists who certainly understand the science, but the intersection of understanding an athlete's life with the cost and the burden of anti-doping with the value of preserving some kind of integrity in sport, somebody who can bring these worlds together does not exist. That is why you're sitting here like, well, what about this? And what about that regulatory issue?
Yeah.
And what about this science? It's because they're all disparate.
I don't know.
It is a very bizarre situation that's hard to like understand.
Yeah.
I do like to say Mark Raimondi from our site wrote a great article detailing everything happening with John Jones from the very beginning to the end. And it was very comprehensive and sort of helps you understand
kind of need
everything.
people like him to break it down for lay
Sure.
people, because
Yeah,
at some
for real.
point it does get so complicated.
It gets so complicated.
It's
If it
helpful.
wasn't for him, I'd be super lost.
You do a
in
lot
this
of that
topic.
too. You break it down in ways for people.
Less so on the regulatory side,
Yeah.
but
But I would say to the question that there has been some trust loss between USADA, because I don't necessarily find what they're doing like the whole thing they're doing for John Jones weird. But what I do find weird is that, okay, they're doing that for John Jones and going the extra mile and taking him to these experts and getting all these tested out. They didn't do that for any other fighter that has tested positive and that has happened to them. Gil Canetti, I've thrown this example tons of times on this show, but he was in Argentina. He didn't have the resources. Argentina doesn't have the machinery, the technology to test supplements for contamination, and they kind of just left them up there. And he had thank God, you know how Spanish people are. You always have a friend of a friend somewhere, and he was able to get into this pharmaceutical company that had the technology to test for one of the things that he popped for instead of the three things he popped for, and he managed to prove that. And once USADA saw that, they were like, okay, well, send the supplements, we'll check them out. But it seems, they're assisting John and not others. That's sort of where I stand.
He keeps using the word guinea pig. I'm the guinea pig for this. I'm the guinea pig for that. So it's like, well, let's just figure this out as we go. And that's where I'm super confused.
it's interesting. The MMA community is actually, people are like, oh, Jeff Nowitzki has lost credibility. And I'm like, how?
Yeah.
How? If you know anything about Jeff Nowitzki, why would you think he lost credibility here? And I'm not here to besmirch his work, but what I'm pointing out is the MMA community is even further to the extremity of zealotry than he is. Like, if you're past Jeff Nowitzki in terms of what you believe in the righteousness of anti-doping, you are a lunatic. You are truly a lunatic. I mean, I cannot mince words here. You are a lunatic. I see fighters all the time being like, we need a clean sport. Look at me closely. There is no such thing. There is never going to be such a thing. It is a fairy tale. It has literally never existed. We have adopted this idea that, we need to get back to clean sport. Tell me when it was clean. There is no academic literature.
Pride, no?
Yeah, right, pride, exactly. There's no academic literature.
Nobody pops hot back then.
There is no academic literature at all that supports any of these claims. It is this primitive idea that we keep telling ourselves. Folks, if you want to keep USADA around, I think it's a bad idea, but I can live with it. Here's what I think it's a bad idea.
I think people just want a leveled playing.
There's no such thing. The whole idea of sports, think about it for a second. What is the very idea of sports? For a race, for a football game, for a fight? It is predicated on the notion that we are not on a level playing field, that you and you and you are better than him.
Drugs shouldn't be part of that.
Neither should be genetic advantages. Neither should be the kind of environment you grew up in. Neither should be the economic resources. This idea that a level playing field exists or something to find is absurd. You can find equality of rules, I suppose, but this notion that there's an equality of opportunity. If I'm next on a line,
so are you pro-drugs? Is that what you're
I'm not pro-drugs, but I'm pro. I'm not pro-drugs in the totality of where you should say you get to take whatever you want. I think that creates a series of moral hazards that we don't want to go down. But what I don't want are these expensive efforts where we are damaging our own ability to enjoy sport based on fairy tales that hold no intellectual weight at all. At all. When I see these people promote these things that are frankly like childlike in their in the rigorousness of the own idea, the rigor of the idea, I find it crazy. Look, the reality is you have to do something, in part because people just can't accept the idea that you can have it. But in other sports where they allow drug use, they just separate it. They have that version of the sport where you test and the version of the sport where you don't test. And people just move on with their day. It turns out it's actually not a big deal at all.
I think those sports, people aren't punching each other or
People-
punching them on the ground.
Okay,
Like,
people do this all the people make this argument all the time, where it's like apparently the only other sport outside of MMA where people do drugs are tennis and badminton. They don't test in. Let me just play devil's advocate. Well, no, hold on. Let me play devil's advocate here. They don't test hardly for anything in the NFL, and those guys are turning their brains into tapioca.
Wow.
There was an article in ESPN recently, like, why is there no steroid scandal in the NHL? It's because their testing policy is a joke. They are turning their brains into tapioca, and their fan bases roundly do not care. Their athletes are the ones who helped craft the anti-doping policies that enable them to not have scandal. So when people say, well, you're hitting another guy with a fist and in the head, I agree. It changes the equation a little bit. But in these other sports that do arguably more brain damage and more long-term bodily damage, nobody cares. So I have a hard time understanding what the carve-out exception should be for MMA.
all right, I see your point.
You know what I'm saying? Like if it's baseball or basketball, fair, right? But in American football, they're killing each other.
So you're not pro drugs.
I'm pro having an adult discussion about it.
I'm more confused
a
now than I was even before we had
The
this.
reality is, look, it is complicated. Dude, think about it for a second. Like, how do you regulate out chemicals from a person's body? When you really begin to think about how hard that is and how fraught with peril that is and expensive and difficult, you begin to say, Jesus, is the juice really worth the squeeze here? The answer is, to a degree, probably yes. But I want to have a conversation about encouraging education. I want to have a conversation about understanding what the risks are. I want to have a conversation where we say, maybe if you tear your shoulder and you're going to be out for a year and you're going to lose all your money, maybe you should get some HGH.
Sure.
Maybe that actually is a medicinal quality that should be involved here. What I don't want to hear is no drugs ever. It's just not real.
I hear that as a viable, I get that, especially when it comes to injury prevention and like cycling things, because there are things that you do that are like legal cheating. For example, have you ever used a CVAC machine?
No.
All right, it's freaking awesome. You feel like you're.
My dad has a CPAP machine
No,
for his face.
no. You feel like you're Sigourney Weaver in Aliens. You're in like this pod, and it basically compresses you, sort of like you're in altitude. So it's altitude training while you're sitting in this pod,
Right.
and it increases your red blood cell count. So you sleep better, you perform better, you recover better, and you have better cardio. I've been using it for 3 weeks, and I'm telling you, I'm like, I cannot believe how much of a difference this makes. I didn't notice it
expensive?
first. It's like $50 a session. They have one in New York. It's at a place called Recovery. But like, you can try it, and the first week you're like, I don't notice anything. And then I'm training yesterday, and I haven't done Muay Thai in a while, and I was fine an hour and a half. And I'm shocked that I was able to do that.
Wow.
So there are, and I saw Chris Cyborg jump in one. They have one at the Performance Institute. So there are things like that that do give you a competitive edge, that do help you recover, that aren't drug related, you know? So I don't know how the two things fall in. I know that they pass CBD oil. That doesn't, it's not against USADA.
Sure.
You can use CBD oil.
Which is a
it's
new,
anti-inflammatory.
change that WADA made to their prohibited list, which is a great thing, of course.
Yes.
Anyway, it's a larger conversation that you have to have, but like I really strongly encourage people to read a book by Paul DeMeo called The Anti-Doping Crisis. He's a Scottish professor who has studied anti-doping for 20 years, and he is in favor of anti-doping, just not the way we do it. And I find his methods to be just much more reasonable in a way of moving forward. Last thing I'll say on this. James Goiter, I'm not sure where he is based, and I could be mispronouncing his name, if I am sorry. He said that apparently one is considering doing WADA standard drug testing, which doesn't even mean anything, but to me it's like, why would you do this? If, again, so in powerlifting, for example, which is a great example, they have the IPF, which is a tested federation, right? Mm-hmm. So you're going to compete there. Not that everyone is clean, but you would get tested. And the other ones, you can just do whatever you want. You weed out the people who just want to take whatever they want. And again, no one seems to care. If UFC wants to double down on USADA, the smart play is to go the other way, to provide an alternative where you do commission testing or something like that. Not to say we're going to follow that lead. I don't get it at all. But
I'm still confused.
that will never change. None of us are. I've been reading. I've got a whole series of books I'm like in the middle of, and one of them. I'm reading a 300-page book right now on just how the anti-doping crisis and how it developed since 1968 is a moral panic. And it's 300 pages. I've got other ones to get to, so forget all the science about it too. There you go, fun.
Please
huh?
don't include that.
Yay!
I know.
Yay!
I think I could write that book.
Proximo. All right, so this is my wife's friend from high school. His name is Lorenzo. He came to my house. He's from Popayan.
Okay.
And he goes, "Why did McGregor's whiskey give me the worst hangover I've had in like 10 years?" Well, first of all, Lorenzo.
the whole bottle.
Yeah, first of all, Lorenzo, you had a ton of it, number one. Number two, have you guys had Proper 12?
No.
You've never had Proper 12?
No. Do you have any?
Not
One of the
only.
first to have it, right?
Yeah.
Chuck is
Well,
like-
we had some in
Yeah.
Vegas on set when we did the MMA Beat.
Did you enjoy it?
It's enjoy is a funny word.
You know what?
Enjoys whiskey.
I've made this point before. It's party whiskey.
Yeah, that's
party
what
whiskey.
it is.
You're at a party,
If you-
someone rolls it out, you're like good to
Yeah.
go, right? It's if you went to a cocktail bar and they were using that to make cocktails, you'd be like, dude, I ain't paying $12 for that. But you know, if it's 4th of July and someone rolls out with a Proper 12, you'd be sized for that. You'd be sized.
Yeah.
Let me say this: I don't follow Connor on Twitter, but I after the whole Faraz thing, I was looking at his feed. Apparently, it's nothing but constant Proper 12 advertising.
Retweets.
Now it is.
I got to tell you, I can't deal with that kind of thing on my timeline. But I hope he gets dumb rich off of that. To be quite candid with you, I've never seen I've seen Sammy Hagar with the Cabo Wabo tequila. But do we know of any athlete, not who got sponsored, like I think Hennessy sponsors Nas, who's an entertainer as well, but like an athlete who launched their own booze line and made cash from it?
I
Can we
can't
think of
anything
anybody?
offhand.
I
Billy
know.
D. Williams and Colt 45. No,
Actually,
But he didn't own that.
I'm kidding.
That was funny.
I had Proper 12, just how you set it up. I was at some random party when I was at a party when I was down for the winter break
In Miami?
visiting my parents.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I was at a party and, you know, these guys show up with a Proper 12 bottle. And I was just like, wait, hold up, what is that? And I did try it. It's all right.
Yeah.
It's party whiskey, bro.
It is.
It's if you don't treat it as anything other than party whiskey,
I
you'll
will
never have a
say,
bad time.
the last time we had the MMA Beat, which was like last month at this point, but the truck was right out front of our building here.
Really?
You know, the truck, yeah.
Oh, really?
I was gonna
Wait,
grab
there's a whiskey truck?
It was like a, you know, he sends on his Twitter, he posts pictures of that truck.
Yeah,
the
yeah,
trucks going around
Okay.
and there was one right out front here, and I was like, that's when you're like, how weird is this? You know, it's just everywhere at this point.
It's the perfect whiskey for Las Vegas, to be
See,
quite
I
honest
don't
with you.
drink,
That's
so
true.
it all tastes bad to me.
You don't drink at all?
No.
Oh my God. You know how many brain
just
cells I
cocaine
have
right
fried?
here. No, I'm just kidding.
Just weed.
I have fried so many brain cells. I could have been Stephen Hawking, but for the amount of booze I've just poured on top of my brain. All right, next. Let's see, Danny, UFC has seen the first 3 champs in the past 2 years. This begs the question. Hold on just one second. I'll get back to that. Are these champs a different league than former champs and fighters, or are there old champs who could have been champ if the UFC would have booked those bouts? Who comes to mind?
like Dr. Seuss.
Real quickly, beg the question does not, I know I'm going to sound pedantic and like a dick, but begs the question does not mean to raise the question. Beg the question is a logical fallacy where the premise assumes the premise assumes the conclusion's truth. So only left-handed quarterbacks are good because right-handed ones are bad, is begging the question. You're assuming the truth of the conclusion in the premise, and you can't do that. So there you go.
Was Luke an English teacher?
No, begs the. I see this all the time. It's like, it begs the question: does that mean dogs should be allowed in bars or something? And it doesn't mean to raise the question. It's a logical fallacy. But go ahead.
Well, I think the answer is
I'm not even sure what the hell he was asking there.
If you could have booked
Champ
champ
champs
if you could have booked champ
from the
champs back in the
past.
day, how many more would you have? And how good are these ones?
The
When
answer
did we
is
chance?
a bunch. I mean, if this trend that we see now of like, oh, we need to have champions, these super fights of champion versus champion, of course, we would have seen a lot more. I think, for example, GSP is someone that comes to mind that could have gotten, you know, although he did become, I guess, champ. Well, he didn't have the 2 belts at the same time. But if he would have had the chance while he was welterweight champ to go up to 185, I think he would have had a nice shot at Anderson, maybe.
Yeah.
Same thing with you know, many other fighters as well. And are they in a different league than other fighters? That's the real question. How much weight do you put in the champ? In a way, I do feel like it's way easier to do one fight, move up a weight class, and then get a belt there than say like Demetrius Johnson go 11 or 12 consecutive bouts just
some
defending
insane
the belt.
number, yeah.
That to me, I hold in high regard. But you know, let's face it, having 2 belts around, it looks cool. It's shiny. It's cool. So, yeah, it's a weird one. I think what it's really going to make the difference is, like, for example, like, have someone like just be like a long reigning champ, like a Demetrius Johnson. And then once he's wiped out all the contenders and then go up, and get the belt there, then I feel like that'll be like, eye-opening. As far as just getting the belts, I feel like it's very doable in I'm not saying it's easy.
Sure.
But it's very doable.
Without clearing out your division, it's more like a popularity contest. You're super good.
Right.
I'm super good. Let's fight, make a lot of money. I'll take your belt away. Then I'll fight someone else who's super good. Like, it's a little bit about that.
Yeah.
There's a lot of opportunities to do that. But it's the one thing that I do commend Bellator for, is that because there's the tournament style, you really do eliminate, and get there, and it's very clear.
Mm-hmm.
And we keep talking about this because there isn't, there is that, but there isn't a clear version of that.
And for Bellator, later this month, Ryan Bader's going to try to be the champ
Sure.
when he goes up against Fedor, which should be kind of interesting as well. So, Chuck, any final thoughts?
I just think if you defend your belt, 6-7 times, you're going to face every kind of fighter, right? Like, probably there's going to be every kind of fighter that's going to prove something. But a lot of times, if you go for a second belt, it could just be a favorable matchup for you. It doesn't necessarily mean you're better than everybody else at that weight class. It just means, because you look at, and I'm not diminishing his work, but I mean, the Eddie Alvarez fight for Conor McGregor was a tailor-made for him. And you know what I mean? I felt like that was a tailor-made fight for him. Could he beat everybody in the lightweight division? I don't know, because then obviously that's the problem, because he didn't defend it.
Right.
And you get into those situations.
That's the problem with the champ versus champ super fights, because if you hold the belt, that's usually a meaning of you're the best in the division, right? But if you're just jumping off for a one fight, I mean, can you really make the case that Conor McGregor was the best lightweight? It's tough.
True.
Next, if Greg Hardy becomes a title holder, how would that affect the UFC's image? Also, what would be the best way for the UFC to promote him? And the truth is, he's so untested, we are probably pretty far away from this. But if you watch him move and watch how he strikes, you can tell he's also going to get good at this pretty fast.
Yeah.
Now, we'll see how well he reacts to taking a punch. We'll see how well he can manage a gas tank. We'll see how well he can do the other parts of his game. But insofar as what he has shown is, whether you like him or not, pretty formidable. So there's many, many questions, but let's say he begins to answer them to the point where they can't deny this guy a title opportunity and he wins. Now what?
That'd have to be at least probably, a year and a half, 2 years in the making. So you'd hope that remove, he's had enough exposure within the sport, there would hopefully be some kind of
redemption story
thing
where
going on, because
where martial arts saved my life, and I get to channel my anger in a better way, and maybe does some type of public service to the whole situation and brings light to it. And we love those redemption stories, let's be honest. But I will say that I hope that's the case. I really do. I almost hope that we can maybe change people around. It's like all the anti-bullying stuff, where it's like you were like protecting the kids that were being bullied, but never working on the bullies, but trust me, I'm not like saying that he's cool or he's good or I forgive him. I don't know the guy. I don't know the situation on the story. I'm just saying that if you are in this, you really better kind of clean yourself up in some sort of way. And you have to address it. You can't not address it.
I know. That's the other thing.
I think, like Chuck said, I think if this does happen, it'd probably be like a year and a half down the line. And I feel like by then, every time he fights, I feel like there's going to be layers shed in the sense of, the media is going to bring up these questions, right? All these past issues that he's had are going to be addressed.
If we're allowed to.
That I feel like at that point, I think it's going to be a different story than what it is now.
Yeah,
because the novelty would be gone, right? Like
it'll stick with him because it's a tough one. I don't think there's going to be people who will never give him that second opportunity to like it. They will not like him. But I think that the more exposure he has with the sport, the more associations, the more times he appears on ESPN, the more all this stuff, the more you just look at him as a fighter. Yeah. And I think that would at some point take over the greater narrative of his story. I think, but it's hard. It's so hard to.
Nonetheless, it's still going to be a thing that's going to follow him for forever.
Yep.
Next. What is your favorite MMA meme? So, Sea-Level Cain is up there for me. Jeez.
I have one.
What is it?
It's so terrible, but it was just funny to me. So, when Ronda Rousey knocked out Betch Correia, she fell on the Straight Outta Compton sign. And it was like Straight Outta Compton in theaters, whatever date. And I was like, that's terrible. But it made me laugh. And there's another one where Herb Dean is like, and when somebody's getting knocked out, and I don't remember who it was, but it was funny.
I haven't seen that one.
That one's great. Because he's reffing, but he's like, whoa! And it's like Friday, you got knocked the F out! And it's Herb Dean's face. It was hilarious. I know all the bad ones.
So Sea Level Cain is like...
That one's good.
But that's like a recurring one. What's the other one? Like Motivated BJ? Is that the other one? Motivated BJ Penn?
Yeah.
Well, there's that one that's been going around forever that they apparently like BJ took a selfie.
Oh, he's got the big fat chin or something?
Yeah, and they like crop him and they insert him in all these photos.
What's every time McGregor posts anything, like somebody right away posts like a picture of his small head. What is up with that? Like he's got this huge body, like his body's normal, but his head is shrunk down to like a pea.
It's like Beetlejuice?
I don't know.
I think Dylan Dennis posted that, and I think that came from a Kanye video that he did with Lil Pump where they had like these big bodies and like I think that's what it came from. I'm not sure.
All right.
Did you hear that Gen Z conversation right there?
Just get it.
Lil Pump.
Lil Pump. He's actually, I think his parents are Colombian, and he.
Is that right?
Yeah, and he grew up where I grew up, like in Broward County, like in Florida. He's a 954 guy.
See, your generation has all the littles. My generation's had the biggies.
Yeah.
No, we had Lil Flip.
Who?
Lil Flip.
Okay.
Lil Flip.
From Houston. We had Lil Flip.
We had Little Richard. We did the whole thing.
I like Little Richard.
I don't know too many of the MMA memes, to be quite candid with you, but also, if I did and I said them, every fighter on earth would be super bitter, so better to just move along and save myself the harassment.
Yeah, I feel like there aren't that many
There's not that,
memes in MMA.
you know what, there are, and you know what, there was a guy on Reddit who made a list of, like, the hipster's guide to watching MMA in 2019. Did you guys see this?
No, I have to.
And it was like, you're the kind of guy, if you're like the hipster, you're the kind of guy who watches Eric Spicely versus Shoeface and then tweets that Meryl Streep clapping gif to them in 50-50 guard on each other.
That's about right.
Yeah, wow. You marvel at parties when everyone else is talking about Dominic Cruz's punching. You marvel at his footwork and things like that. Yeah. It's actually a really funny list, so check that out. How many more? We got a couple more, I think, very quickly.
Which begs the question.
Yeah, which begs the question. This is an interesting one. I think it's probably the last one. DC United, listen to this one, will broadcast 34 games on Flow Sports. They don't even have a TV deal other than when they have national games, right? On Flow Sports next season, their only TV exposure will now be on national broadcast. While streaming is the future, do smaller niche sports adopting now hurt their potential to grow their fan base because it's harder to find / behind a paywall? Because streaming, I think, is the future.
Yeah.
Right.
But in what packaged and promoted way, I'm not sure anyone has the answer. True. I got to tell you, in D.C., and by the way, the guy who wrote that is actually Irish. He moved to D.C. Everyone in D.C. is like, I'm sorry, where are the United? They're going to be on Flow Sports? I'm not watching that. So what do you do? Like, what is the right answer? Like, when is streaming a good thing? When is streaming a bad thing? I think is the question.
So I have a Roku, and sometimes on the Roku, when you like go to home, they'll say this movie is free, and then it turns out to be on some weird like channel that you have to subscribe to, but you at least go to the free movie. That's the only thing I can think of, that some of the stuff will be free and it'll just drive people to these particular sites. That's the only thing I think of.
This is a tough question, but I feel like maybe one of them is also the type of audience that you cater to, right? If it's most of a young man's or young people's sport, probably streaming is the way, right? If your audience is older people, perhaps they're more likely to watch something on the TV than streaming.
I think the issue here for if you're like a soccer team is they were used to watching you on like the local channels.
Yeah.
Now they're not going to jump behind a paywall to watch. That's one red flag.
Right. If you're also like a local team is different than the UFC who's international, right?
Yeah.
So yeah.
But also like behind the paywall thing is interesting because it's one of the most successful sports verticals out right now, at least in combat sports, is Flow Grappling. Flow Grappling. I don't know much about Flow Wrestling and Flow Combat. Sort of, I see more as a news source. I mean, I know they do MMA news, but on the Flow Grappling side, the jiu-jitsu side, they've got it completely on lock. People seem to be appreciative of it. But on the other hand, it's like even as a DC United supporter, I'll catch the games at Audi Field or on ESPN Plus whenever they make it. I'm not paying for that. So I think that streaming can this is what I'm talking about with the UFC. Like it's good to future-proof yourself, right? I don't know how TV is going to be in 5 years. On the other hand, some of that content's going to get buried, bro. we got to kind of just be ready for it. Some of that content is just going to go like a butterfly in the wind, and no one's going to know it happened. So I'm a little bit concerned about that. I believe that's it, right, Joe? One more. Last one, very quickly. Any truth to the Conor versus Paulie boxing fight rumor? Here's the question for the panel.
That was a thing.
Yeah, there was. It was a rumor on Twitter yesterday. Here's the thing. I've done a 180 on this. When he was champion, it was a pain in the ass, and when he was gone for a while, it was a pain in the ass. But now that he's back and he lost, I really don't care. It's the same thing with Floyd. Dude, when Floyd goes and fights kickboxers who are undersized or MMA fighters, Floyd's never more exciting. It's like, wow, Floyd actually marches forward. This is great. He actually fights in a way that's pleasing to me. With Conor, you don't have to worry about that. He always is pretty aggressive as a fighter, but I'm just pointing out, like, he's not holding up the title picture anymore.
Right.
I mean, the guy is just tweeting about his whiskey constantly, which is fine. I hope he gets crazy rich. But to me, it's like, I don't care to see that fight, but it doesn't offend me. And hey, these guys might make some money.
Yeah, I saw that R.J. Clifford had tweeted out, like, hey, if that fight is going to happen means that we get Ferguson versus Nurmagomedov,
right.
I'll take it.
Yes,
and
exactly.
That's the way I look at it.
He's not taking up space in the thing. Do you guys?
I would just copy and paste what Chuck just said. If you're not holding up the division, if I don't have to question where you are and where you stand because you haven't defended the belt, do whatever you want. It's entertaining. I don't care.
I sort of like to see him. I prefer him in MMA just because that's what he's really good at. But hey, I'd be in it for the hype because those two are going to go back and forth. So
you got no balls. Paulie would tell me he had no balls for like 6 weeks. It'd be the worst build-up ever. And the best. All right, so we are back. Our first show of 2019 is in the books. We'll be back next week as well. We've got to figure out the timing, though, because the UFC's coming to town.
That's right.
You're going to your neck of the woods.
Yep.
Are you in Brooklyn tonight?
No, there.
So that's going to be kind of fun. It's going to be TJ Dillashaw's going to be in town along with Henry Cejudo and the whole gang, including Greg Hardy. So we'll see what happens with that. But we'll figure out something to keep this train rolling. We appreciate you guys. Keep sending those tweets using the hashtag #TheMMABeat. And until next time, hands up, chin down, let them fly. This is the MMA Beat.